Welcome to the Corporate Learning Network videocast. I'm Jeff Cattell. Today I have with me Patrick Conway, Chief Knowledge Officer at the U.S. Army Combined Arms Support Command. Patrick will be speaking at this year's Corporate Learning Week, November 12th through the 15th at Disney's Yacht Club Resort in Orlando, Florida. Patrick, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome. So can you start off by letting us know what you'll be speaking about at this year's Corporate Learning Week?
Yeah, in general terms, I'm going to talk about three things. One is incorporating learning, if you will, into our corporate strategy and making it as important in our corporate strategy as the other business objectives that we have at our particular organization. Well, the second thing I'll talk about is how do you use technology in a resource-constrained environment. What I call a resource-informed process to assess what technology fits where, at least in our experience for our learning needs and in supporting our population. The third thing I'll talk about, and these are very general categories, is how do you assess that? How do you measure not only the performance of what you do for training, development, and the processes that produce the learning objects, but how do you measure the value at the end of the pipeline? Because if those two things aren't in balance, what I contend you have is you have an imbalance on your resourcing efforts in terms of the value you're producing for your customers. So those are the three general categories I'll go over while we're sitting down there in Orlando.
Great, great. So now I'm wondering if you can think for me, what do you see as the biggest challenges that you face in your role as Chief Knowledge Officer, and what are the things that you're doing to address those challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. And these are very, very big issues that we're wrestling with, not to say that they aren't issues wrestled with by any corporation.
Right.
And everything I say in this interview will be obviously tainted towards what we've experienced in our particular mission set. But I think the largest one is really taking a step back and thinking about learning in the context of what it means today. And for us, that was extremely hard, and predominantly because we are quick to gravitate to the term learning, but we are slow to disavow ourselves from the inhibitors that really allow us to look at learning in its truest context. So we have approached it as learning in its fundamental terms is about a change in behavior or a change in cognitive understanding. And if you think about that for a moment, that means a lot. Because it means a lot in terms of how do you cause learning to take place. And if you look about today, learning is going on all the time. People are learning something, whether it's good or bad, through a lot of different sources, a lot of it powered by the internet, a lot of it powered by gaming technology, a lot of it powered by the social media trends. So the question becomes, how do you leverage that to ensure that the training that might be important for your members of an organization in terms of their performance and their productivity, how do you leverage that to cost effectively improve their learning and obviously the organizational learning as a whole? So getting that message across is hard because you have many different generations that have learned in different ways and they're not all the same.
Yeah.
So how do you master that? And how do you define learning objectives? And how do you make sure that what you invest in is going to get you the value at the end that you're after in terms of performance?
That makes a lot of sense. So speaking of these learning things, you're sort of assessing it from almost this abstract or almost theoretical level, looking at it, it sounds like. But can you explain to me what you've done at the U.S. Army in terms of operations, training and learning operations in the last few years?
Yeah, over the last couple of years, what we've wrestled with as we have socialized these theories, these concepts, and actually put them in practice, is reached out and looked at what was going on in other avenues and other learning venues elsewhere. Good example, University of Phoenix. Now there's I would suspect one of the largest universities in the United States in terms of population. that has fully grasped the concept of learning communities. And most of the students in the University of Phoenix are using communities, online communities, to actually conduct their courses and actually interact with one another and collaborate as teams, if you will, classroom teams, to learn a given objective or a certain course that they've got to be able to master to get their degree. Mm-hmm. That's one benchmarking avenue that we took to look at how we could leverage that. So over the last couple of years, we've expended a lot of effort and time building those communities around our target population, which is about 450,000 soldiers and civilians all over the globe. Mm-hmm. And built into the construct of communities, the ability for them to share experience with each other at the point of need. So if I'm out there and I'm sitting in Iraq, and I'm a mechanic and I don't know how to fix a piece of equipment, right, I've got reach-back capability to the experts and the expertise right then and there on how to do so. So that delivery of knowledge that enunciates learning at the point of need is one of the heavy investments that we've placed on our learning efforts here. We've also taken our classrooms, coupled them with the same communities. So now what occurs in our classrooms is a course-centric community, practitioners, if you will, who have advanced knowledge shared before they ever move and come to resident training, formal classroom training. They use it while they're in their formal classroom training. And then once they graduate, it becomes a source for reunions. Wow. So they gather back, they share their experiences, they kind of point out what worked, what didn't work. Mm-hmm. There's a collaborative learning process that takes hold there where they continue that for an entire career. They build trust, they build teams, and they help one another out, irrespective of whether they're sitting in a classroom or sitting in their particular organization performing their mission. And I guess the third one I'd enunciate, Jeff, is the fact that when you're looking at return on investment, mm-hmm, our model, the traditional model, where we've got 18 to 25 students in a classroom, wasn't sufficient to answer the need by which we had to learn, specifically the speed. Okay. So what we did is we virtualized some of our classrooms, some of our campuses, so that instead of having 18 to 20 to 25 people in a geographically constrained room, we've got it virtually delivered vis-a-vis online networking or online, similar to Skype, delivery of training that takes place that increases our classrooms up to 100, up to 250, irrespective of where they are. Yeah. And without them having to take any time to travel or take an extensive amount of time out of their schedule to geographically relocate to obtain the training they need. Now that doesn't minimize the focus of our resident training. It allows us to enunciate the important things that they have to have while they're here that we can't virtually deliver. So those are three examples of things we've worked in the last 2 or 3 years.
So, I mean, so many things on your plate, my goodness. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do these learning and development programs then fit into an overall talent management strategy?
Well, I'll give you an example to think about when we talked about communities. And the example that I'm going to bring up is a community that's focused on a particular practice or a skill oftentimes have members in it that have, as you know, a sundry of other skills or learning that they've acquired over their careers. Mm-hmm. Maybe even totally unrelated. But it is talent inherent in our workforce. And what we've uncovered is that many of these folks have talents that are necessary elsewhere in our workforce. So by developing these collaborative communities, what's popped up are these other skill leaders who have the talent necessary to support an objective that they perhaps aren't working on given their location, given their job, or given the function that they perform. And I call that talent discovery. Yeah, wow. Because we oftentimes focus on talent retention in the context of the people leaving, mm-hmm, but I would offer to you that many of us don't know how much talent actually resides in our organization today. And much of what we need to be more successful at what we do is already here. We just don't know it. So we spend a lot of time on discovering talent, further developing and reapplying that talent, and then making sure that recruitment of talent from the external sources, the new people coming on board, are fully woven in that process so that talent retention becomes a primary objective of our strategic plan. We call it succession planning.
Yeah.
So I want to couch it that way because it isn't just let's do an inventory of your skills before you retire. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, what I get back from folks that are new to an organization is don't give me a list of how to do things. Just tell me the top 5 people to talk to and I'll figure it out. That's a good thing. That's a good way to approach talent.
Yeah, wow, that's a really cool idea. A really different way, I think, of looking at talent management that a lot of corporations are, at least in the U.S. today. So one thing, just sort of circling back to what you mentioned at the beginning, one of the things you'll be speaking about at the conference is how technology has played a role in your learning and development program. So can you explain to us what technology you guys use right now and how that sort of factors into L&D for you?
Sure. I think I need to couch it first, though, to say our approach to technology, we've gone through some learning curves. Initially, it was very easy to jump to the newest technology that popped on the screen, or popped in Best Buy, or popped into some store and say, I got to have some of that.
Yeah.
But it also becomes quickly recognizable that approach isn't very resource conscious. So we backed off a little bit and basically took the approach that before we adopt a technology, we look at some things. Primarily, what's that technology pursuit for? Give it a purpose. Why, in fact, do we need this technology? What business outcome are we trying to achieve? And oh, by the way, how do you measure it?
Yeah.
And once we know that, then we start peeling back the onion to figure out, okay, what is the processes by which this technology will be applied? Is it internal? Is it a management structure technology that will help us do things more efficiently? Is it something that will help students learn in a quicker way or a more intuitive way? And we peeled all that back to look at the processes and the systems. And then the final analysis is, what does it take to sustain that technology? And by doing so, we look at the bill at large. It's easy to grab onto something today, but with the shelf life of technology being what it is, we have to take a very insightful look at how do you maintain what you're using the technology for, how does it integrate with other technology, and oh, by the way, what's the future look like for that technology? So by doing so, we've got a little bit more prudent and fiscally responsible way of approaching technology, and it's led us down the road to adopt things like gaming, virtual multiplayer, multi-lever exercises, which are globally dispersed in terms of our combat operations, all of it online in secure mode, of course. And we've looked at different avenues of using mobile apps, and for certain purposes, mobile apps have a benefit that we apply. Very similar to the gaming. The gaming is good for some of the more cognitive skills, the non-tactile things you have to do. But at the end of the day, we're not going to teach somebody how to be a sharpshooter by pushing a keyboard. Right. So there are things that you don't use gaming for. But at the same time, if we can produce those types of technology enablers that engage our learners and help them learn quicker or faster, then we can certainly achieve a learning objective and use our other resident time, for example in a classroom, to focus on other things. So I mentioned already using social media. It's an avenue for learning. That is in fact a technology as well. Using wiki approaches to developing the training products as opposed to the older fashion where we staff them ad nauseum through the email system. A lot of different approaches, but all of it has to be looked at from the context of what are you trying to solve, and then measuring if you're actually doing so. In some technologies, there was an imbalance between how much it took in terms of man hours and dollars to sustain. as compared to the value at the end of the pipeline. How well did that soldier perform? And if it didn't do well, we discarded it. But we have to be very religious about making sure the money we spend on technology is well invested and achieves the outcomes of our strategic plan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, you're mentioning a lot about measurement, which I know is a big topic at large in corporate America, but certainly looking within L&D departments, there's been a lot of discussion recently about specifically return on investment, and from a financial standpoint, not necessarily a return on investment specifically in terms of the skills, like you're mentioning in your answer to the last question. So, from your perspective, how do you show your department's worth to upper level management in the U.S. Army, and how do you show the ROI to them?
Yeah, great question, and I realize how complicated that is.
Right.
I don't want to paint the picture that we're done. This is a journey, not a destination. So it's a constant revitalization of determining metrics, and generally we use two areas. One I call efficiency, and that is how well are we performing the functions, the processes that lead to the production of our training materials and the execution or delivery of our training and education and learning. Mm-hmm. Those processes are very, very complicated. They're hard to measure, but what we started doing was assessing in terms of things like man hours and costs, programmatic costs. What does it take to produce that which is needed to train and educate? And how well is it performing? How many hours are we expending on updating a training support package or building the objects or the videos within an interactive multimedia instruction venue? And once we've captured how well we're performing that, the other category of measurement is how much value is there to what we have produced in the eyes of the customer. Mm-hmm. So, as an example, how well does a soldier perform once they leave here and go to their first unit that went to Iraq? Not how many graduated. That's a efficiency number. But a value of effect is how well they're performing once they get to where they're going. In terms of apps, the amount of hours expended on developing a mobile app mm-hmm. is then compared to how many times is that app downloaded and used. And those two numbers give us indicators. And then we sit, my leadership, myself, and others look at that and determine whether that investment is in fact producing the value intended. And all of that, of course, is tied to the strategic plan, because all of us are driven by budgets. We have to balance and use our fiscal resources in a manner that is duly supportive of our missions and the things of that nature. We can't just have things that we pursue that are nice to have. They have to have value at the end of the day towards our mission. And so when we balance all those out, that gives the leadership the ability to make decisions on what to invest in and what not to invest in based on the feedback of the commanders and the organizations by which we provide those soldiers or those capabilities. So it's a very important business to measure. Yeah. And I think that's probably in the business world, they do a much better job at that because they have a bottom line they gotta reach. But it's been a little bit harder in the academic arena to wrestle with that because we oftentimes think, well, we're not going to measure that because it's a sunk cost, and therefore we're just going to train and educate. And the value is how many walk out the door with a certificate or a graduation or diploma in their hand. At the end of the day, it's how well they perform in their organizations. Yeah. So that's both externally and internally. And that's how we approach these two categories of measurement. It's not a perfect science. There is a qualitative aspect of all of this that we certainly have to recognize and make decisions on. But my boss and the others that make those resource decisions are the ones who kind of gauge that. And as long as they have fact-based data in front of them to make assessments from, then I've done my part to contribute to the cause.
Yeah, yeah, wow. That seems like there's a real key, a way of looking at it from many different angles, which is really important, I think. That's great. So looking to the future for you guys, what do you see as the emerging trends in both the specific learning and training that you are developing at the U.S. Army, but then maybe more broadly, in L&D departments, in general?
Well, I think this question gets to the notion of we're going to have to embrace the fact that the knowledge economy, the digital wave, if you will, the speed by which technology changes, and the learning needs, the ever-evolving learning needs of our digitally enabled workforce. Those three factors, to include, the larger factor of a resource-constrained environment, are going to drive us to have to embrace a more holistic approach to learning and using all of the avenues that have emerged off the information age in the knowledge economy to leverage learning opportunities. Right now, there are so many knowledge sources out there, ways by which you can learn, reading, whether it's reading, whether it's videos, whether it's online communities, whether it's gaming, whether it's tweeting. I don't care what it takes. There are knowledge flows occurring every day where people are learning something. The question becomes, are we leveraging that to ensure our workforce is learning what they need to learn to be productive in our organizations? If we are not, and we're myopically approaching what many would say is an industrial age construct of training and education and using only that, then we're going to be hogtied because learning is happening faster than our ability to keep up with it.
Yeah.
So I really think holistically getting at the notion of adopting, embracing, and capitalizing on the various knowledge sources that are out there, the means by which you can learn, then that will open up new avenues and new ways of accomplishing learning in a corporate sense, in a structured sense that has value to the organization. A good example I used with an interview yesterday was I was discussing with a good friend of mine the use of social media in an organization, and good friend, but in his organization, social media was a no-no. And the claim was that use of social media would in fact detract from the organization's performance. And quite frankly, my counter to that was, well, that's because you haven't given it a purpose. If you look at social media and you were to assess how you can use social media to instill learning through those knowledge flows, then you can accomplish some objectives, not all, but some objectives that are contributors to the performance of the organization, not distractors. And that's a different way of looking at things. And gaming's another approach. You can use gaming as a distractor because it's entertaining, or you can instill learning objectives through gaming. Your choice.
Yeah.
But I guess my point is we've got to figure out a way to adopt it and use it in a creditable way, not disavow or push it aside, because people are learning through it every day and faster every time you turn around.
Yeah. No, it's such a big part of people's lives, so to completely disallow it makes little sense. You're so right. All right, I know I've kept you on for so long, but before I let you go, what are you most excited about at this year's conference?
I think what I really want to, beside the fact of being able to talk to other thought leaders and professionals on these topics and garnering ideas, certainly what I've shared here is only what I've encountered in our experiences. But I'd really like to get at and talk to folks and learn about what's being done with corporate degrees, tailoring and tempering corporate degrees to more readily adapt the what I call the workforce that's coming out of the academic sector and more easily ingest them into the performance of the organization. I think that's one of the key things I like to talk about. I think I'd like to also know what people are doing with respects to credentialing the learning that takes place by individuals on their own. This gets back to the talent management question.
Yeah.
You know, there is so much talent out there, and I know I can speak in my organization, that is untapped.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons it's untapped, because first, it's not recognized, and second, we don't credential it. Credential, what I mean by that is attribute it to something that equates to the same qualifications as a degree coming out of a university. People learn on their own all the time, and there's some pretty smart folks out there that don't have anything but a high school education, but boy, they put me to shame. And then there's the ePortfolio initiative. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I've heard about it discussed at a few other online venues that I've been involved in, where instead of having a typical resume, it takes all of these other learning venues that you've been engaged in, wraps them up in conjunction with your formal education and your resume, and then keeps track of projects you're currently working. So you have a holistic view of an individual, as opposed to merely something that's been placed on paper and only covers certain areas. And I think those are the three biggest things I'd like to hear about. I know there's a lot of good stuff going on in other organizations. I'm always in a learning mode. I like to pick up on what others are doing and see in the networking sense how they're carrying out what they're encountering in terms of issues, probably a lot of them similar to mine. And again, I don't want to paint a picture that we've solved anything holistically here, but probably most of what we've encountered is occurring elsewhere too. And I'd just like to hear other ideas on how they're wrestling with it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks, Patrick. That was Patrick Conway, Chief Knowledge Officer at the U.S. Army Command Support. To learn more about Patrick or any other speakers at this year's conference, you can view an agenda by clicking the Download Now button below. Thanks for watching.